Okay, so the movie I chose was Canvas, the 2006 film. And the mental health illness that I found in the movie was schizophrenia. And then this is just a little bit to explain why I diagnosed. Her name is Mary. She was a mother of a child and also a wife to someone in the movie. But in order to diagnose someone with schizophrenia, you need to have two psychotic symptoms, and those can be a delusion, a hallucination, impaired speech, or an impaired movement. You can have an impairment in self-care. You can have a restricted range of emotion, poverty of speech content, inability to initiate goal-directed behavior, and then one of the two symptoms that a patient needs to have in order to be diagnosed with schizophrenia must be either a delusion, hallucination, or disorganized speech, which Mary wound up having all three of them. Um, and then another thing that a patient needs to have in order to be diagnosed with schizophrenia is you need to have a 1 month active phase. So that active phase requires the two symptoms to have like a delusion, hallucination, or disorganized speech. And then you need to have a minimum duration requirement of 6 months. So they need to be having some kind of symptom within a 6 month time period. And then this is just a short little video to better explain schizophrenia.
Schizophrenia affects how you think, feel, and behave. It affects around 1 in every 100 people. Schizophrenia has many symptoms, and you probably won't experience them all. They're symptoms lots of people have mildly or occasionally, but with schizophrenia, they're much more distressing. A hallucination happens when you hear, smell, feel, or see something that isn't really there. The most common type is hearing voices. These are usually rude, critical, or just plain irritating. A delusion is where you're completely sure of something which others see as mistaken or strange. Paranoid delusions are upsetting ideas that make you feel persecuted or harassed. You might start to see special meanings in ordinary events. It feels like things are specially connected to you, or that someone is communicating with you in strange ways. You can feel that your thoughts aren't your own, or that your body's being taken over. You lose interest in life. Your energy and emotions just drain away. You can struggle to concentrate and lose your normal thoughts, feelings, and motivations. You can also feel uncomfortable with other people. If you're starting to get these symptoms, you should talk to your doctor and start medication as soon as possible. Medication can help the most disturbing symptoms. Most people get support from a community mental health team. This includes a psychiatrist who organises your medication and takes responsibility for your overall care, and a care coordinator who helps you make a care plan and ensures you get the right support. Support from friends and family, counselling, and other services are also very important. People with schizophrenia can feel suicidal, particularly if they're not getting the right support. That's why it's really important to ask for help. Learn to recognize early signs that you're becoming unwell. Agree with someone you trust that they can tell you if you're becoming unwell again. Try to avoid things that make you worse, like arguments, stress, street drugs, or drinking too much alcohol. Learn ways to relax. Make sure you regularly do something you enjoy. Look after yourself by eating a healthy diet with lots of fresh fruit and vegetables. Get some regular exercise, even if it's just a short walk each day. So, what does the future hold for someone with schizophrenia? Well, 1 in 5 people will recover completely. Most will get better, but have times when they get worse again. Many settle down, work, have good relationships, and live full lives. To find out more about schizophrenia, visit the
Okay, so now that we know a little more about schizophrenia, we can dive deeper into Mary in the movie Canvas. Um, so these are just the symptoms that I found that Mary had. She had two different types of hallucinations. She had auditory and visual hallucinations. I'll get more into this in a later slide, but she was hearing things, she was seeing things that just weren't there in reality. And it was a major symptom that she was having. And then she was also having delusions. She um, was just so set on that, like, these things were real and that these things were happening, but in reality, they just weren't, and she would, like, double guess people and, like, even if they told her, like, it's not happening, she just wouldn't believe it, or if they told her, like, that something she was seeing wasn't actually there, she just wouldn't, believe it because she was so set on it in her mind. And then she was also having impaired speech and impaired movement. Um, how she was talking just isn't how someone normally would talk. And again, I'll get into this a little later on in the PowerPoint, but also her movements were not how someone would normally move in some other circumstances that she was in. And then she also had an impairment in self-care, which I'll get into a little later on. And she had paranoia basically, and like just different kind of like mood symptoms and all of that. And then she had all these symptoms within the 6 month period because it's been happening for 18 months, the husband said, and she has had at least 1 month of an active phase. So she does fit all the requirements for schizophrenia. Okay, so these are just some of the specific examples of her behaviors that I can relate to schizophrenia. So the first thing that I really found was this was really early on in the movie, and she was so convinced that she saw someone near her window. So she called the police. The police came to just scope out everything, and they said that no one was there and that there was no evidence of anyone there. And she kept asking her husband over and over again, like, oh, like they checked for footprints, right? They checked for footprints. And her husband kept reassuring her that they checked. And she just wouldn't believe that they actually checked and that they didn't see any footprints, when in reality, it was just her hallucinating that she saw someone near her window. And then this is an example of paranoia. She was really worried that her son wouldn't come home from school, even though he came home from school every day. He took the school bus. She met him at the bus stop, and as soon as the bus got there, she ran onto the bus and hugged him and was like, "I was so worried you weren't going to come home." And it really affected their relationship because the son, obviously, he was 10 years old at the time. He didn't want his mother coming onto the bus and embarrassing him because she didn't think he was going to come home. And then this is the example of disordered speech. This was really early on in the movie. It was clear that she hadn't seen her son in a while, and she just kept saying like, "Oh, like I love you so much." Like it was just repetitive, very repetitive, and you could tell like it was disoriented. Like there was no flow in like sentence structure or anything like that. And it was just the same thing over and over again. And it didn't really make sense when she was trying to tell her son like how much she missed her and how much she loved her. So much so how much she loved him. So much so that Mary's sister asked if she was okay, and she's like, "Yeah, like why wouldn't you think I'm okay?" Um and then she also had a shift in mood when she was talking to her son. One second she was talking to her son, she was telling him how much she loved him, and then the other second she was yelling at him for something that it was so minor. But that was just a major shift in her mood, and it was just like not how someone would normally talk or switch their moods in just like a conversation with someone. And then this is just an example of her not properly taking care of herself. She forgot to take her medication to for schizophrenia, which is supposed to like help alleviate some of the symptoms that she was seeing, and she just wouldn't take it. Um, so the day that she forgot to take it, she kept saying she knows that people are listening to her conversation. She said that her house was wired. And then she just kept saying, I'm not going, I'm not going, I'm not going, I'm not leaving, over and over again, which again is like repeated speech. Um, and then she started calling like whoever she was seeing and whoever she was hearing liars. And she grabbed a knife to, I guess, defend herself from the people that she was seeing and hearing. And she accidentally cut her son with the knife. And at this point, her neighbors called the cops, and her neighbors, um, well, the cops made her go to a mental institution because she was putting her family at harm from her behavior from schizophrenia. So that was a major example of her like schizophrenia. And then another example is when they went out to eat for Thanksgiving. They made a reservation, and the reservation didn't go through as they wanted. They were waiting an hour longer than their reservation, and then the husband finally got up and was like, "Oh, like we've been waiting for an hour," and the workers were like, "Oh, like so has everyone else?" And the husband was like, "Okay, like we're gonna leave," probably because he knew his wife was about to get, get some of the symptoms of schizophrenia soon because it was a while that she hasn't had any. And then they handed the family an apple pie, and the wife, or Mary, starts freaking out because it wasn't a pumpkin pie. And she just kept repeatedly saying, I don't want apple pie, I want pumpkin pie. I want pumpkin pie. I want pumpkin pie. Which is, again, is disordered speech that she was showing. And then this is another example of schizophrenic behaviors that she was showing. When she was in the mental institution, she looked at an empty wall, then looked at a door, and asked who was laughing. And obviously, there was no one there. It was a wall and a door with no one behind the wall, with no one behind the door. Then she started to hold her ears and scream, and then she started yelling, "Stop it!" Um, and then she tried to like tune out the hallucinations that she was hearing with real noises. So first she turned on the sink water, and then she turned on the shower water. And as she was turning on the shower water, she was holding her ears still to try to not hear the voices in her head anymore. So, accurately or inaccurately depicted, I definitely think it was very nicely like depicted. They portrayed schizophrenia very nicely through body language and facial expressions. We were really able to see how intense like the mental, emotional, and physical like aspects of schizophrenia are for someone who is experiencing it. And not only for her, but for her whole family, we were able to see the effects of schizophrenia. Um, and it was not like over exaggerated. There was no sugarcoating of the symptoms. Even the movie ended in like a non-ideal way or like a non-happy ending. Just to show how real schizophrenia is, and it can happen, like this effects of it can happen in times that you don't want it to happen. They had a plan to go on the sailboat that husband built for the wife, but the wife just could not leave the mental institution because she knew she was having really bad symptoms and didn't want to put her family through it. And then I also think the symptoms were like also very well portrayed um, for schizophrenia. All the symptoms seemed like very real. Nothing seemed unrealistic. Um, it showed that like her functionality can be partially restored at sometimes because sometimes she would seem like normalish, and then the next minute she would just totally like have really bad schizophrenic symptoms. So it just goes to show that you can be partially restored, but then the next moment you can get really bad symptoms, which is something that not a lot of people know about schizophrenia. Um, and then the treatment was also very realistic because it showed the family struggling to understand why the medication that she was taking just wasn't working. Once she got to the mental institution, she was taking it every single day, and they would go to visit her, or Mary would go to visit them for a few days, and she would still be going through like really, really bad symptoms of schizophrenia. And the son and the husband just were questioning, like the nurses and the doctors, asking why it's not working. But this is the reality of medication for schizophrenia. It does not work for everyone. And there's different medications, and each medication has different effects on people, as we saw with Mary. Um, and then it allowed viewers to see that schizophrenia is a lifelong disease and that there's no like magic treatment. Like there's really no treatment that can fully prevent it or fully stop the symptoms. It can just help a little bit. And there's not a lot of treatments for schizophrenia at the moment. So these are the treatment methods that Mary had. She had some sort of medication. It was never specifically specified in the movie. It was most likely phenothiazine or thorazine, which just reduces the symptoms of schizophrenia. And then the husband did mention that she was going to group therapy, which I'm going to assume is when they showed um, everyone in the mental hospital painting. And Mary goes, when you paint, they go away. And then someone asks who, and she goes, the voices. So you can see how well like painting works as a therapy for some schizophrenic patients. Obviously, not all of them because it's different for everyone, but for people like Mary and other people who are painting with her, it worked very well. And then there was a family therapy, not for Mary. Mary was still in the mental institution, but because the impacts were so real and so harsh on the father and the son from living and taking care of someone with schizophrenia, um, they went to family therapy, and then the therapist asked the son how he was doing, and the father didn't even like let the son answer because he was just so worked up. It was a lot for him to handle having a wife with schizophrenia. But yes, they went to family therapy. And then these are just some of the takeaway points. Um, Schizophrenia, I feel like, based on this movie, it's kind of seen as a joke, at least for younger kids, because we saw that the son was really getting made fun of for his parents acting the way they did. Like, obviously, the mother was schizophrenia, and then people were saying his dad was acting crazy too, just because he was dealing with someone living with schizophrenia. People started calling the son crazy. People asked the son which one is crazier, the mom or the dad. Um, and it was really just getting to him as a 10-year-old child. Like, you don't want your parents to be known as crazy, and you don't want to be questioned if you're crazy, like, let alone your parents. And then someone also asked him if his mom had to wear a straitjacket at night, which is just really out of hand and inappropriate for someone to ask just because his parent had schizophrenia. People need to definitely be more educated on this topic, I feel like. And then I feel like this film can get rid of some of the negative stigma that revolves around like mental disorders like schizophrenia, because it shows how real it is and how there's nothing you can really do if you're taking the medication. You can go to behavioral therapy, but Mary was never offered that in the movie. So I just have a feeling that people who watch this can take schizophrenia more seriously. And then the film showed how much of an impact the family has had living with Mary, who is schizophrenic. Um, After like people started asking the son if he was crazy or if which one of his parents was crazier, it was really getting to him, and like the living situation that he was in just wasn't good. There was police always at his house when his mom was still living with him. It was just a lot for a 10-year-old to handle. So it led him to cut classes. He got into a fight. Um, And then the son got into a fight with the father one time, and it got really serious. The son just wasn't getting attention from his mom, obviously, because his mom was in the mental institution. Um, but he wasn't also getting like attention from his dad really because his dad was coping in a way that he shouldn't have been coping. He um, got fired from his job because he just took so many sick days and kept asking for a raise because he needed money to support his family. And then once he got fired from his job, he just worked day and night building this boat for his wife. But it was a sailboat because she loves sailboats. So he really wanted to build it for her, but that's where he put all his time and effort. And the son goes, "You pay more attention to the boat than you do to me." And then the husband or the dad was like, "You want your mommy back? Well, I want my wife back in whole." And that was just really powerful for me to hear because you can clearly see the hurt in both of them from having someone that they both love so much being like diagnosed with schizophrenia and trying to live and cope with that is just really hard. Um, but yes, that concludes the presentation. Um, Overall, it was a great movie. I cried. It was very emotional, but it was a very good depiction of schizophrenia.